The purpose of this is to encourage as many businesses and people to take positive, sustainable action as possible. And if we're going to do that, we need to make it feel tangible, accessible, straightforward. And I think this is a lovely job for communicators, because certainly as a marketing agency, the storytelling is the exciting bit. That's where we get to engage people, connect people, move the story forward.
Hello and welcome back to the Marketing Podcast. I'm Jodie Williams, co-founder of the Marketing Pod, and I'm here with Ros Wisdom.
Hello.
And today we're joined by the very lovely Ellie and Emma, which means we've got both strategy and content in the room. Lucky us.
Hello.
In unison, I love that. And today we're talking about sustainability comms, which is important, urgent and necessary, but also fairly complex. So we promise today no jargon bingo cards, no net zero poetry, although Emma is very good at poetry. And we're going to be very honest about what's working, what isn't, and why many sustainability messages just aren't landing right now.
So if we could just start quite gently with a quick question for Emma. Emma, be honest. From your perspectives, what's the biggest piece of sustainability jargon you've heard recently that's really made you cringe?
Oh, that's an interesting question. To be honest, there's too many examples and just too much jargon. I think it's great fun to kind of name and shame and talk about all of the scandals. I mean, I think we all remember, a coffee brand with the strawless lids that actually had more plastic in than the strawed lids. The fashion brands with the conscious range that weren't particularly conscious of anything. Every industry has probably got an example. But I think it's also really important to recognise there are so many brands out there just trying to do it right. And actually, the limit is the language a lot of the time. And there's a lot of sustainability terms, the way that they're evolving, their literal meaning versus their kind of accepted meaning versus their kind of applied meaning means that we're all hearing slightly different things. Words like green, sustainable, eco-friendly, net zero. They've all got, more than one meaning.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it is all just jargon. There's a lovely dairy company. There are other dairy companies available. But Yeo Valley, who makes some really lovely organic dairy, and they recently commissioned a study of 2,000 adults, and they actually found that many of them are using terms like green and eco-friendly and sustainability, as often as every day without really fully understanding the meaning of them. And they refer to them as eco-linguistics, which I think is really lovely. And obviously they're really important words because they're shaping our understanding of climate change. But it's, we're not using them necessarily consistently and authentically. So it's really important that we're taking the time to explain what we mean when we use them. And I think we'll probably have more on that later. But obviously, a lot of businesses that do that are leaving themselves open to accusations of greenwashing just because we're using the words slightly differently.
I really like that. I really like explaining, when you use a term, explaining what you mean by it, because actually you could probably get a degree these days, couldn't you, in how much jargon there is out there. Ellie, same question to you.
I think I was just going to echo Em's point, really, which is actually that the environment, the landscape is maturing. So whereas green and sustainable might have been useful terms a while ago and net zero, actually they've almost become noise and it becomes really difficult. So I think there are some front runners in terms of corporates who are much further along and more advanced in their sustainability journey. And they're probably quite, they're doing a lot of corporate reporting. They're quite advanced in terms of their understanding of the terminology and what it means for their business. And I think the trick is then translating that down for smaller businesses so that it's an inclusive language for everybody. But I think actually where things are moving is positive. It's towards specificity of terms and making sure that we're not using vague language, that we're not being ambiguous, that actually companies are moving to a point where instead of saying they've got a green product, they're talking about the progress they've made or the statistic about why it's a better option than another one. And similarly, not just for products, also for companies, when they're talking about their own progress or their own sustainability stories, they're being much more specific around what it is that they've done, about where I think there's more humility. I think it's where, where they've failed to move forward or where they haven't made the progress they've expected or where they've made surprising progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And also specificity. That's a word I cannot say. So kind of I tip my hat to you there, Ellie.
I'm not even going to try and repeat that one.
Have fun on the editing. Do you think at the minute, kind of with the level of jargon, do you think we've kind of hit a peak where it's kind of, or do you think it's actually getting worse? Do you think people are getting a bit fatigued by it all?
It's interesting because I think there's a real job as communications professionals to make sure that we understand some of the technicalities involved with them and what the different terminology means, whilst also making it accessible for the layperson. Because ultimately, if we're going to encourage people, the purpose of this is to encourage as many businesses and people to take positive, sustainable action as possible. And if we're going to do that, we need to make it feel tangible, accessible, straightforward. And I think this is a lovely job for communicators because certainly as a marketing agency, the storytelling is the exciting bit. That's where we get to engage people, connect people, move the story forward. And I guess the trick there is making sure that we've got the evidence to back up any claims, that the storytelling is accompanying hard facts, so that the narrative is accurate, sensible, has integrity, and we're not at risk of misleading consumers or overstating sustainability credentials.
Yeah, I really agree with what Ellie's saying. I think making it really clear is part of the battle, but also just remembering that businesses are, trying to balance a lot at the moment. They haven't just got to make sustainable progress. They've also got to remain competitive. And when you're worrying about keeping your operations going or protecting your bottom line, it can be really hard to make space for your sustainability comms and getting that right. So I think, we have got a duty to remember all of the competing pressures that businesses are feeling when we're talking to them as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. Ellie, listening to what Emma has just shared and the things that you've just talked about as well, how do we genuinely start reframing sustainability as a commercial opportunity rather than just an obligation? How do we kind of make that that change out there in terms of how we communicate?
I think that's an area where the conversation's really moving on forward as well. Talking about sustainability was often seen as the forward-thinking do-gooders, perhaps, rather than a commercial imperative. But actually, that's really moving. And at the kind of larger end of the corporate business, there's real commercial impact, not least of all where if they can operate more sustainably and reduce, for instance, their waste, then they reduce their costs. So there's kind of real financial benefit to it. And also longer term, it means that if they can reduce their carbon, they're exposed to fewer carbon levies going forward. So there's kind of real financial gains associated with sustainable practices. But not only that, actually lending becomes more straightforward. They've got better access to finance options. So there's a lot of financial and commercial drivers associated for large corporates. And I think they're really pushing that down the chain as well, so that actually perhaps medium or small businesses where they're looking to work with large corporates, there's supply chain value. So they've got better access to commercial opportunities through tender if they can demonstrate that they're on the same journey and supporting the journey of their customers.
Of course.
That's so true. When we worked recently with Cambridge Judge Business School, a lot of the entrepreneurs there were looking for investment and they couldn't achieve it without having a really strong ESG kind of commitment and plan in place. On the other side of the fence, the one thing I keep hearing, and I've heard it quite recently, is around if you're looking for investment in a company, probably slightly bigger than, slightly bigger than an entrepreneur, probably have done a couple of rounds of funding already. And actually having some strong credentials, whether that's B Corp, whatever that might be, can increase your multiplier. So there is more commercial sense in it there. What do you think on that one?
I think investors take a longer term view. So actually access to finance, again, there's a lot of sustainability linked loans out there. So I think that's certainly part of it, but also just having a bigger market to go after and being able to access a greater part of the market certainly provides that commercial opportunity. It means that they've got greater access to market opportunities and sales.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely about so much more than compliance, isn't it? It's about growth. It's about seizing commercial opportunities. It's about the future. Yeah, I think the narrative is already really moving on, isn't it? From we have to do this to actually there's a real, this is a really smart business move. This is going to be really good for us in the future. And it's important that when we're putting out our sustainability comms that we're remembering that it's like all good marketing. Keep the customer at the centre of what you're saying, what matters to them, and talk to them about it. So don't just tell them, you should be doing this. You should be using your business as a power for good. Yes, of course they should, but also there's just so many benefits of doing that. And, from commercial resilience to kind of getting and retaining new talent. Yeah. So, it's really important that we focus on that in the way that we're talking about it.
It's quite nice, isn't it? All those, as you mentioned earlier, Ellie, about the do-gooders that have been banging this drum for a really long time. Actually, everybody else has got on board, and the benefits, rather than, it feels good doing the right thing, but actually there's other benefits to it as well. So it's finally, they've got the backing of everybody, on the board to get on with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Emma was just talking about how over the years the narrative has really moved on. One of the things that I've noticed is previously sustainability conversations really focused on carbon. I'm not hearing so much about that now. These days I'm hearing more about how you can't really hit net zero without considering nature. So why is biodiversity now coming into the conversation? Biodiversity, water, it suddenly seems to be a big business issue.
It's going to vary a little bit depending on the industry, of course, and some will be more greatly affected than others. So, for instance, construction has a huge impact on nature and the whole supply chain associated with that. So it's a big deal in that sector and many others like oil and gas and engineering and so on. But I would say I think there's a growing recognition that carbon is essentially a part of a nature strategy. You can't address carbon without nature. And certainly regulations around that are starting to become more advanced, and that's growing attention towards those areas. So carbon is an amazing starting point and it's matured fairly quickly. But actually understanding impact to nature and dependency on nature is really important as part of the overall story and impact. And I think that extends into social value as well. So if you look at, for instance, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that covers everything from social value through environmental, through climate action and so on. So you can see even from that carbon in climate change is one small aspect of an overall sustainability drive. And it's more about equality, making sure that we're all collectively protecting our planet and our people. But certainly things like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is a framework that's up and coming, and there's lots of early adopters to that. So that means that nature is more closely in the spotlight and more companies are getting switched on to it, and they will eventually be pushing that down their supply chain as well. And equally, anyone who's been doing CDP reporting for a while is probably doing something around nature. They've got various categories there, there's forests and water dependency and so on. So often companies that are affected or who have a big impact on that their awareness will be raised through that kind of reporting.
Thanks, Ellie. That's really interesting. Thank you.
So Emma, we've seen examples that when sustainability comms fail, they really fail. So without naming and shaming brands, because we don't want to get our own legal team on our backs, what are the biggest, most cringeworthy mistakes that B2B brands are still making in your view? Is it kind of the humble brag? Is it too much jargon?
I think there are a few examples that we could probably give of each of those. I did hear some interesting talk about this earlier, actually, building a little plug here. Our very own Ellie appeared earlier today on BusinessGreen's webinar, Spotlight on Marketing, How to Minimise the Risk of Greenwash and Maximise the Impact of Green Messaging.
I like that plug.
Google that. But yeah, alongside Ellie, there were so many brilliant and intelligent things said on the webinar. One of the guests was Miles Lockwood from the ASA, and he talked really clearly and concisely about conditionality and basically just not being too absolute in your claims. Obviously, avoid technicality and do keep those claims really simple and straightforward. Think about the language you're using, but also just don't be too absolute. And I think, there are probably lots of examples of where people have got it wrong just by making claims that actually were too, bolshy, too absolute, too arrogant, and then they couldn't back them up. They didn't have any certification. They couldn't put any sort of facts and figures behind them. And that's really where they've fallen down. So yes, put it into layman's terms, but also just think about building in that conditionality.
Thinking about it strategically, though, Ellie, if you could just give me a few thoughts, what damage does that do? What happens when a brand presents themselves as doing things on a sustainable basis which actually don't stand up when they're looked at in detail?
I think it's interesting what Em's saying about the absolute. So I think all of us as consumers, whether you're a B2B consumer or a domestic consumer, feel suspicious of a big, absolute, vague sustainability claim. So you automatically don't trust that brand quite as much. I think where people are succeeding is where they're being really specific and they're talking about particular progress that they've made or particular quantified benefits. And actually, as soon as people can see something tangible, then it builds the trust conversely. So I think actually in terms of the damage, it can be really, if they've been investigated by the Green Claims Code and that complaint has been upheld, that's really damaging reputation. It can take a long time to build that up again as a brand. And certainly, if you're a B2B going through tenders, that kind of thing comes up in the tender response and it can take several years before you can shake that off. So there's a big commercial impact as well there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, just to put you on the spot a little bit there, Ellie's looking at me, slightly gone out now. You've just talked about people that they make these big kind of bolshy claims, as Emma said, but then they back it up. They actually have the substance. Can you think of an example of someone who does it well from your perspective?
I think it's probably easier in some ways for those larger organisations that are quite mature in their sustainability reporting, because actually the depth and the rigour of reporting validation, statistics and examples is really rigorous and it's signed off externally. So actually those that are doing that level of reporting and have had several years working that through and building their organisation around it and taking employees with them are doing quite well. So if I look, I've spent a certain amount of my time looking through sustainability reports, and I would say the likes of National Grid or Diageo are doing really well in terms of setting that out within their corporate reporting and demonstrating how their sustainability strategy works together and how different elements and different strands are woven together, so that actually communicators can build a really interesting narrative that feels credible with it.
I think you've got to play the long game as well, haven't you? Like stepping outside of B2B for a minute, but brands like Patagonia who've just been doing it for years and doing it really well, they've got the proof, they've got the social proof, they've got everything they need to make those big claims, and
they've got the receipts.
If you were a new brand, though, if you don't have the history of somebody like Patagonia, for instance, and this is a point that you want to promote for yourself, how do you cut through the noise? So how would somebody new come in and just cut through the noise? So with so much out there around green and sustainability and net zero, how can they start to make a difference in their messaging?
I think it's about making it relatable and making it transparent, isn't it? Again, it's about taking people on the journey with you. I think if you're a young brand and you're more likely to be kind of hitting obstacles and having to find ways around them, just be really honest about that. Take people with you. And you're doing good there in itself, because you're kind of just encouraging other people to do the same. It's going to kind of fight against greenwashing, because people realise they don't have to be perfect. They can absolutely kind of set a goal, realise it wasn't quite the right goal, explain why they've had to kind of reroute. And again, that transparency over time will just, build trust and take people on the journey.
I'm not going to name names. We actually had a client, didn't we, who overtly went out there and said, this is what we aim to achieve. Didn't quite hit their target and shared
Here are the
that
reasons
honesty.
why.
Yeah. And actually, it's so relatable, isn't it? To kind of say, look, we're on a journey. It's a journey. It's not we've achieved this or we're going to achieve this and then we don't update you again until we've done it. They actually take people with them.
And they've got it built in. I mean, this is the other thing, it's about having a really authentic attitude and a culture that stems and that goes throughout your whole organisation, so that actually kind of every single person that works within your organisation is on board.
It's relatable, and it's I think they probably gained a lot more trust and credibility in doing that, because actually it's hard, isn't it? It can feel quite an overwhelming task.
Yeah, if that's one thing that I think every business should be doing, it's making sure that the sustainability department and whoever's in charge of that is talking to the marketing department, and that the people who are customer facing understand the values and why it's happening and really buy into that. That's going to be the best way to make sure that your comms really do ring true, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's having that consistent voice. So, I mean, as brand ambassadors or brand protectors, which many of our clients are, there's nothing worse than building a brand around a tone of voice or a set of values that feels really strong, and then discovering that your, client-facing or front-facing teams are delivering a very different tone or a very different message. So actually embedding that really well within the organisation, so it's part of the culture and everyone's on the same page and it's really well distributed or learned and embedded within the organisation. Super important.
We've talked a little bit about being honest and being transparent. Do you think that's kind of where credibility from brands is kind of won or lost? What's your perspective, Ellie?
I think so, certainly in the sustainability space, and certainly where, if you think that many brands are purchasing from other organisations and they're asking about their sustainability credentials as part of that, some of that is to demonstrate that they are working with like-minded businesses, and some of that is because actually their supply chain's emissions are all part of their own Scope 3 and they need to reduce their own Scope 3 emissions as well. So actually being able to build that trust, making sure that the responses are accurate, that there's real credibility and the numbers are well quantified, and that the methodology is understood is really important to communicate forward, because actually for the larger businesses, they're using that data, they're using that supply chain as part of their own sustainability goals. So there's a real impact of getting it wrong or being inaccurate or not describing the shortcomings.
Yeah, totally. Do you know what, you're right on like-mindedness, because we've just, again, little humble brag here for the pod. We've just become B Corp certified ourselves. But the kind of outpouring of love from our own client base has been so lovely, because it's like an acknowledgement that, yes, we're with you. Yeah, we share this. We're in it together. I love that.
Yeah, and I think people want to work with people who want to do well. And, we're a people business. So actually that's really important for us as well as individuals. It's really important, for the business, but it's important to a lot of our team and the podsters that we really believe in operating responsibly, and actually we like to work with clients who feel similarly. So it's really nice that we've got that collaborative partnership where we're all driving towards a similar goal. We might have different routes to getting there, but that's totally fine. And it's really nice that I know we've had clients contact us and say, can I come in and discuss your journey and how you got there? And that's really nice, because we all feel part of that same drive forward.
I was going to say club.
Or club.
Can I ask one more quick question? I do apologise, because I'm enjoying talking to you both so much. The topic of sustainability can feel a little bit overwhelming. If you were to say one thing to businesses that, for whatever reason it's landed on their desk, whether it's because they've got a supply chain that's demanding it from them, or actually they've now got their own ambitions to, say, become B Corp, whatever it might be, how do they get started? What's the first thing you would do? I'm going to go to Ellie. I'll come to you first.
I think it can feel quite overwhelming, not least of all because lots of reporting changes are underway and different reporting obligations apply to different kinds of organisations. There are loads of resources out there. So actually, I think there's probably a combination of accessing help that can really take them forward, because nobody's going to be able to figure it out easily on their own. But actually, there are loads of really good sustainability consultancies and agencies that can help with that. We aren't that. We're happily, we are communication specialists and we love talking about sustainability, but we're not consultants in actually achieving, the accreditation. But we would absolutely recommend making use of those resources. And actually carbon reporting is often a really good first step. Scope 1 and 2 is relatively straightforward to start to build.
Scope 3 is a little bit harder, but actually Scope 1 and 2 is a really good place to start. And the other side of it is actually talking to employees and finding out what they're passionate about, building a sustainability strategy that is broader than carbon, that really addresses the things that employees are passionate about, because actually then that's where everybody feels part of the solution and part of the mission.
And Emma, just if we can focus on like the comms element of that now.
I would say just begin. Do you know what I mean? Just get started. It can feel overwhelming, but actually if you start simple and start small, and just build up over time, because it's a learning process for everybody. I mean, I was really involved in our B Corp process, and that felt like an insurmountable mountain at times, but we got there, and now we're at a point of wanting to communicate that and kind of educating our teams on it and educating our clients on what it means to them, and we're just kind of chipping away at it. And I think just don't be frightened, just take the first steps. And use your peers as well, I guess, is the other thing. And there's lots of communities out there, like Ellie says, lots of people who want to support you.
And share your journey with both employees and with your customers. Yeah. Fabulous. Okay, well, that was fun. Thank you so much, both. If there's one thing that this conversation confirms, it's that sustainability doesn't have a communication problem. It's just probably got a bit of a clarity problem. Ellie, Emma, thank you for cutting through the noise with us today. And to everybody listening, remember that the goal isn't to sound perfect or to be perfect. It's to sound human, honest, and just worth paying attention to.
And ideally, paying attention to without needing a jargon glossary too.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Marketing Podcast. Be sure to check out marketingpod.com for more of the latest B2B marketing discussions.
Or if this episode has really resonated with you and you'd like to discuss this topic in more detail, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.